Chapter 2, The Elements. No one knew who first heard Illyrian. Some claimed they heard a crisp, light, breathy voice, while others heard a deep baritone. The messages remained the same. With each lesson, the voice espoused teachings of kindness, humbleness, and simplicity. Somewhere along the line, these messages grew in the telling until their meanings were lost. As those who preached Illyrian's words passed through time, distortions set in. Eventually, those who had last heard the voice perished, and new teachings grew in their absence. Ditan. Confounded longlegs, always getting where they're going like they need to get there sooner than later. Ditan huffed as he ran after Trinea. I'm on her side. I hope she realizes that. He couldn't fathom where she'd gone, but her short stay in class and abrupt departure had forced Miss Jessman to cancel her lessons early. Ditan had lingered, unsure what to do. His classmates whispered. Concern, fright, and derision crept about him. Derision! Barring Trinea's own mother, she was the purest soul he knew. Talk escalated, recommending a search, and he decided then and there he'd find her first. The old pond, that's where she'll go. Whispers spoke in his mind, coalescing out of a gabble of confusion, clearer to Ditan than hearing the voices around him. What makes you so sure? It's peaceful. Streaks of brown and light blue shot down the road, highlighting footprints for him. They veered off into tall grass, obviously bent and trampled in her haste. She'd taken a shortcut, not even following their normal worn path. Like a lazy fox, keen to be caught, Ditan said. You sure don't care where you're going, do you, Trin? Or who's following? He tracked her, sure the elements had told him precisely where she headed. Today they were more lucid than normal, making some sense to him. They expressed themselves with words and thought, unhindered by vague hints and impressions. Words were more recent and welcome development. Light, I'm like a careless fox, too, leaving just as much of a trail. Trudging ahead, the ground grew soft and murky. Trin, you better be here, or so help me. Ditan yelled, unconcerned. Reed slapped his face amidst the buzzing of insects. He burst forth into a clearing bordering the pond, a sort of mucky, spongy patch of bog grass, squelching the closer he got to the water. Trinea sat back from the shore, hugging her knees to her chest. I don't have your height, Trin. Your stride is an unfair advantage. It doesn't have to be. He ignored the voices. Ditan laid down on his back next to her, exertion forcing him to fight for his breath. She leaned over her arm to look down at him, a wan smile on her face. He saw the strange marks had faded. No longer glowing, they remained barely visible. Her skin had begun to change color, no longer pink and fleshy, taking on a faint gray pallor. It was a stark contrast next to his dark green skin tone. Is that such a bad thing? She cooed, but not quite teasing. Her eyes were a metallic gold and amber. He hadn't expected that. See, she's calmed down. What are you? Oh, Trin! Ditan exclaimed, flustered. He pushed her stomach. She chuckled, falling over next to him. They lay next to each other, staring up at the sky. Why'd you follow me, Ditan? She asked. You didn't have to chase me all this way. Chase you? It was all I could do to keep up. It's like you were racing. You saw why I ran. Please don't make it a competition, she said quietly. Everything is a competition, Ditan objected. He looked over at her. He sighed. But it doesn't have to be, he conceded. Can't catch the hoofer by being lazy. Light, I sound like my parents. Time is money, they both mocked, then laughed. He smiled. They could be overbearing at times, but he knew she liked his parents. Without them, who would he be? Anything. Hush. Silence followed. Gotta love him, he said. I hear you, she agreed. Clouds drifted overhead, a gentle breeze rustling the grassy reeds. Insects droned a melancholy dirge as the afternoon wore on. The humor they each faked ended in silence. Ditan couldn't settle on what to say. Sometimes he'd look at her and she'd look back. He could see she was deep in thought. Susurrations, faintly audible vibrations, pitched their ideas in his ear. Nothing coalesced, the whispers guiding him here vanishing in confusion once more. He was alone, lost as much as she looked. He understood. Hey, Trin, he asked after some reflection. What are you thinking about? Trinea glanced at her hands, then touched her face. Life. What comes after school? What to eat for dinner? She was deflecting, and he knew it. Existential type stuffy stuff? She nodded. Yeah, why? I don't know. He took a deep breath. Sounds too deep for me. He gestured at her hands. You want to talk about it? No. How can I help, Trin? You can't, she said, rolling onto her side to face away from him. I wish you hadn't come. I couldn't leave you alone. He grabbed her shoulder and pulled himself closer. Just don't. Looking at her back, he watched sporadic streaks of light blue slowly hover around her as the elements guided his attention to both of them and her. He blinked, and it dawned on him. You're such a dummy. She feared what had happened to her. She didn't have to be alone. Show her what you've been hiding. Do you want to see a trick? He asked. She looked back at him, half turning. Hopefully it's not one of your stupid pranks. Pranks are never stupid. Maybe ill-considered, but what is it, Ditan? Trinea sounded exasperated. If I let you ramble on, you might never get to the point. I'm not my mother. Thank the light. He sat up. No, this is something different. The blue sparks sped up, swirling and eager, ready for his control. Something special. So soon after Miss Jessamyn's discussion about the Illumin vigil, he couldn't figure out how to tell her. What she'd said about the sentinels lingered at the forefront of his mind, heightening his sense of danger. I've been hearing them speak to me. Except now, damn it. Where'd they gone? Intrigued, she sat up. What do you mean? Who speaks to you? Come on, just move. Do something. Show her. Blue sparks streaked away. Wind flattened the grass with a quick blast. Her gray dress fluttered, and she shifted to hold it down. Trinea's runes flared white in response, then faded as the gust ended. What was that? That's, just the warm-up act, Trin. Shh. He put a finger to his lips. He squinted, looking hard. Where are you? Ditan cupped his hands in front of him, trying to find the color. He shut his eyes. Oh, now you say something. Streaks of red swirled in his hands. Ditan smiled as a smokeless flame bloomed into a small spiral from his palms. He felt his skin grow cold in response as part of his body heat fed the flame. The elements, Trin. They speak to me, he whispered breathlessly. The flame guttered out. What do you think? Trin stared, perturbed. How did you learn this? She asked. Ditan wanted to gush about it. She'll never believe me. Believe is irrelevant. This is what I do with my spare time, he offered. I hear them. The elements, that is. Like whispers. Yeah. Whispers. She shook her head. What? I heard them when I slept, and they stayed when I woke up. A while ago they started making sense. Sometimes. I just had to pay attention to their whispers. Ditan watched Trinea's eyes dart around. She grasped his hands. You heard what Miss Jessamyn says about abusing the elements. It's forbidden. How are you okay with this? He got nervous. Yeah, no. He sighed. It's part of the problem. He pulled his hands away. I didn't have a choice. I thought you'd understand given what happened today. I should have kept it a secret. Secret, agreed the whispers. Ditan slumped. Trinea's eyes widened. Who else knows about this? Her runes flashed yellow, then faded. She tugged her hood low. Have you told your parents? Of course not. Why would I? I'd be out on the streets faster than you can say. Faster than the bark crashes from the skylights. He shook his head. No. Mama should have discovered this when you and your parents came here. Should have tested you. Light, Ditan! She gasped. She would have needed to bring the Illuvian sentinels to cull you. He nodded. Why tell me? She asked. I thought you might understand why, he replied, rubbing the new runic etches on her hand. I should go. Trinea nodded and stood. He hugged her waist, already feeling foolish. I'm appreciative that you shared this with me, she said. Thank you. Ditan couldn't tell if she was genuine. See you later, Trin, he muttered. Stupid, stupid, stupid. He pushed the reeds out of the way and trudged back through the grass, taking a more circuitous route. No point in leading anyone back to here or to her. Once he was safely out of earshot, he felt more at ease. That didn't go well. It went well. Who asked you? He folded his arms, sulking as he walked. You don't know nothing. What were you trying to do? What did you think would happen? Hey, Trin, you're a freak, I'm a freak, we're both freaks. Let's be friends? He chastised self-deprecatingly. Why hadn't you told her before? Didn't you trust her? Of course I trust her, he told himself. That's why I told her. But not before, chimed the voices. You're not part of this conversation, he said. Butt out. His path took him far around the eastern side of town before he edged his way closer. Ditan had argued with himself so long he hadn't realized where he was. The only one keeping it a secret is you. But why do I do that? You saw what happened to her. You saw the looks. You saw her fear. I'm not afraid of some looks. Why stay silent? Why stay silent? The voices echoed. It isn't right to control the elements. She had a point. Would you give them up? Already the elements were an extension of himself, even if he hid his abilities. Would you give us up? The voices echoed self-referentially. He didn't have to think about the question. Ditan knew the answer. Of course I wouldn't. I'd as soon cut off a hand. Then why don't you show the world? I'm not ready. Will you ever be ready? Chet's stew wafted through the street near the harvest hearth, and his stomach grumbled. It had been hours since he'd eaten the sweet roll Trinea had given him. Someone had begun singing, and he went inside, dropping the argument he'd been having with himself. He knew enough to have those only when he was alone. It drew too much attention. Instead, he smiled and climbed up onto a stool. Oh there, young Ditan, Chet greeted him. Interesting day, to say the least. Yeah, he replied. I'm sure you heard about Trin running through the streets glowing with light, and that's been the talk of the town. Even as Chet spoke, he saw a couple of his classmates huddled into a corner deep in conversation. The magistrate put out a word to find her. I think Deputy Ells is headed to her house. You don't have any idea where she is, do you? You've never seen something like that. I'm worried she might hurt herself or someone else. I'm sure the magistrate suspects she might do even worse. I haven't heard much more than what you've told me, Ditan managed, unwilling to admit anything. He leads the town, not me. All I can do is think of my stomach and how empty it is. Could I get some of your stew before I head home? Sure thing, lad. Chet leaned in, scanning the room. You didn't hear it from me, but the Illuvian Vigil took special interest in her, he whispered. Coming up, he continued more loudly. Ditan gulped. The Vigil, why do they care? It's me they'd be looking for if they knew. Thanks, he said, when Chet returned with a steaming bowl of potato and chicken stew. He slurped at his meal slowly, thoughts racing. Ditan wondered what danger Trinea's powers posed. They appeared harmless. Rangers could provide answers, he thought. She always had answers. He had no doubt the Illyrian priestess would recognize the light manifest in her daughter. None of the Red sermons mentioned such a thing, but to him it was plain as day. The Vigil would protect both women, not harm them, he hoped. Yeah, right. Ditan blew on his spoon. Ditan Coinlock! He dropped it onto the ground and groaned. His mother, Ola, stood in the doorway. Blushed brown cheeks highlighted her green skin, flushed with anger and frustration. Her hands curled next to her hips, disdain palpable on her brow. Where have you been? I have been worried sick about you. Make no mistake. All the strange goings on with your friend, then you up and vanished? Think about how that makes us look. She stumped through the inn, talking loudly. And I find you here eating soup. Soup! The nerve! My dinner is gone cold, and we had to come looking for you. Roast falcon liver gone to waste. You knew I was cooking it for dinner. All this worrying for nothing. Nothing! What have you been up to? You'd better have a good reason why I've gained 3 more gray hairs today. Make no mistake.